there, I wanted to do a quick little bonus video for you on the topic of Raynaud's syndrome, or some people call it Raynaud's disease. First of all, I'm not a medical professional, so this is not medical advice, but it is a condition that I live with, and somebody commented, Steve Flynn, thank you very much for the suggestion, that some people were talking about it in one of the Facebook groups and how to deal with it on the trail. If you're not familiar with what Raynaud's is, it is a syndrome where your blood vessels actually go into spasm and they shut down and you get numb in your fingers and in your toes, and in my case I even sometimes get numb right at the tip of my nose, and it's the funniest feeling. It's just kind of pins and needles a little bit, and you just feel like, oh, you know, I have something on my nose. It's kind of bothersome, and it presents itself in weird ways. It's not so much, you know, when you're out in the cold that you really get numb fingers and toes. That can happen, but like for me, when I go to the grocery store in the summertime, if I'm wearing sandals, my toes will go numb. So it's an irritation. It's not a life-threatening disease. You're not going to lose your fingers and toes, but it is an inconvenience. And when you're on the trail and you're in those situations where you're trying to do things like start your stove and your fingers go numb, it can be really a pain in the you-know-what. So getting dressed, fiddling with just little things like on your tent, you know, maybe doing the Velcro, things like that, it can just make little aspects of life a little bit more difficult. So some of the things that I did to accommodate on the trail were, number one, make sure that I had mittens that were easy for me to wear. And in my clothing video, I talked about how I switched from the outdoor research gloves, which had the E-tips on them. I thought those would be good for, you know, touching things, for doing my phone and that sort of thing. But because I wore the gloves, I sleep in the gloves, I had them on and off all the time, I ended up going with mittens that had a flip top, so I could flip open and have my fingers available, and they even had a little flip on the thumb, which was great. So I could keep my hands warm at night and not get that numbness, or if I was just getting into camp and it was a little chilly and I was worried about my fingers getting numb, same thing. Cooking, same thing. I'd wear the mittens and try to just keep my hands as warm as possible so that they didn't go numb, and if they did go numb, then I would have to warm them up, you know, stick them in a pocket or go do something else until they warmed back up again so that they were more functional for me. I did not have very many issues with my toes on the trail, but I did always make sure that I carried some dry socks. I had some real nice vampire socks to sleep in. They're farm to feet socks that were a little bit looser than regular socks, because one thing about gloves, mittens, and socks, if they're too tight, they tend to constrict a little bit, and so that can kind of trigger that reaction of losing the sensation. So I slept in those, and then I also carried an extra set of the Injinji sock liners. So I always had a dry pair of those if I needed them, and I had open toe camp shoes, but I could also wear my socks in my camp shoes. Not very glamorous from a fashion standpoint, but if I needed to, say, going, you know, to the grocery store or something like that, I could just throw on some extra socks with my shoes to keep my toes from going numb. But pretty much that's all that I needed to do. I did carry a buff, and I had a couple things where I could pull something up over my nose if it was real cold, but the nose really didn't bother me as much on the trail. It was mainly the fingers and being able to do activities that required being somewhat nimble or dexterous with your fingers. So those are my quick tips for dealing with Raynaud's on the trail. It's something that you might not be familiar with if you don't have it, but actually about 20% of the population does. It's hereditary, and who knows, maybe it's something you've been suffering with and didn't even realize what it was. So anyway, hopefully that will help if you're going out on the trail and you need to keep those fingers and toes working well. Take care.